Back.
You want to give us a countdown to welcome us in?
5 and 5.
We're on right now. Okay.
We're rolling.
Jumping in.
Oh man.
We're live.
This is
We're
good.
live from the Dirty Tap Water.
I'm glad Dirty Tap Water is back. It's been too long. There's too much dirty tap
It
building
is, man.
up in the system.
Yeah, dude, there's some nice iron ore forming around the faucet that's just waiting to get run through.
Tell me, do you find that there's like if you don't talk about ideas for a certain amount of time, does your mind get more calm and more clear, or does it get more filled?
Oh man, that's a good question. My mind's never not filled with ideas. I think. Yeah, man, I think rarely is my mind not filled with ideas, except when I'm trying to like check out and like numb on like social media, or like just scroll, like doom scroll, or like somehow disassociate. I think when I get really tired, I just want to like everything to shut off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the times that I tend to like just like kind of, my mind doesn't shut off though, so I just try to fill it with something else. So this is like one of the things that I've been trying to do a lot more recently is like listen to less podcasts. Like I used to be like, if I was in the car, I was listening to something. If I was doing the dishes, I was listening to something. Like if I was on my way home, I would listen to something. And I still listen to things. Like it's not like I don't ever do that anymore, but it was like constant. And because I had this mentality of like, well, I can grow more, I can learn more, I can obtain more. And I just really tried to step back from that. It was last Lent, I think, that I just like gave up. I think I gave up YouTube, unless it was like I was sitting down to watch YouTube video. Mm-hmm. So I gave up like kind of background listening. Because I realized that I think a lot of times I'm afraid of the wide open space of my mind and maybe the thoughts that might emerge there. But it doesn't often quiet unless I'm probably pretty deep in meditation. That's maybe sometime. But even then, dude, it's like just doesn't really stop.
So interesting. Other than you, the other person that I talk about this kind of stuff with the most is my sister Maria. And have you ever heard of Alexander technique? Yeah. She's found a lot of success,
but I'm not familiar.
So Alexander technique, I'm not familiar as well. I just know from her. But she said that it has just totally changed her relationship to like performance, any kind of performance anxiety. Yeah. There's this kind of dystonia that some musicians will go through where like they have practiced so much that they can't hit like a certain note. Their body, like it can't do the simplest things like pluck a guitar string, from, they don't know exactly what causes it, but often what musicians will do is they'll try to like hyper focus on their one finger and they'll then try to pluck it. And they're finding that like what is really helping musicians with this is to flood open their awareness. Yeah. So rather than paying attention to one body part, she's been trained, I guess, through this technique to kind of like flood her focus wide open to her whole body, into the whole space around her. And then her body. And
what does that mean? Like flooding? What does that mean? Like flooding awareness? Like when you say that?
It's like having wider and wider. I just think it's good to distinguish between awareness and attention. Like awareness is the ever present thing in us that's always just noticing whatever it is that we're experiencing. Yeah. And attention is where we place the flashlight of focus, the beam. And she's talking about it being wider and wider, meaning that for example, spatially, she'll be thinking much more about her body globally rather than in a specific place, or rather than noticing things in space, she'll bring her attention to the space itself. and really interesting things can happen with people who have a lot of muscle memory, a lot of training in something, but often their minds kind of inhibit them from just flowing with it. But it is that open space that it seems like is so counterintuitive. Like we have to be taught to enter that open space, and we have to have a rationale for why the open space might be helpful.
Dude, well, I think it gets beat out of us in childhood. It gets like beat out of us in socialization. I was talking to my wife about this, and like, dude, little kids are like freaking brilliant. Like they know things, they feel things, they sense things. Like little kids are in tune. And adults, because we've had that like beat out of us, we don't have the patience for it. So I think kids really do live in that space of open awareness, right? Which would be oftentimes, and I think in some of the there's a pack on Headspace called The Spectrum of Awareness by Diane something. I forget her last name, but she talks about that as non-object focused attention, right? So that kind of open monitoring, I think that's what you're describing as like the flooding awareness. You used a word similar. It's non-object based, so it's just resting in awareness as such, or some kind of derivation of that. But I think like little kids live in that world of just immersement in it all, and I think we just beat it out of them through socialization. Because parents don't want to deal with. I don't think it's don't want to. I mean, I think that's how it shows up, but I think it's don't know how, because we were never treated that way. Like I was talking. I don't know. Maybe I've already said this, but I was teaching my class on theories of personality at the university, and I told everybody, I was like, more or less, it's all your parents' fault, but it's all their parents' faults too, and it was all their parents' faults too, and it was all their parents' faults too, and we're all just like, there's some philosopher that said like we're all just cast into being. And so it's like, oh, well, my dad, whatever, wasn't able to do this perfectly. And it's like, well, yeah, well, neither was his dad. Neither was his dad. And it's like, yeah, I think there's an appreciation that we can have for like, yeah, there's something true to that. Like our parents let some things slip through the cracks. But I think there's something that's really beautiful in the sense of like, yeah, I think they're doing the best that they can too. But I've just been really like, I think I've always thought about kids as like little unintelligent adults. They're just like not as developed. I've always had not a negative view. I love kids. Like I've never looked at kids negatively, but I've looked at them like according to like performance. I've compared kids to abilities of adults, and I've always thought to myself, man, a kid could never compete with an adult in anything. And I think recently I'm just coming to this realization that like, and I think it's because of the interior work that I'm also doing of like my own childhood and the parts of me that are, little kids that have connections, that see things and feel things. That little kids just have this ability to just feel things and see things and know things. But I think that gets disqualified and discounted by people like me who are kind of just like, yeah, you're just like kind of an unintelligent adult, like little person, but I think that's where they live. I think they live in that place of like openness to the world until, because of pain and hurt, that openness necessarily has to get shut because they have to develop some type of defense system of like, okay, if I'm totally open, I'm getting like hit with rocks, like I'm getting hurt. And so I think that's how we develop like these defenses, and our awareness shifts into focus, like you said, but that focus is on self-protection rather than connection.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm listening to an ultra runner right now. Her name is Courtney Hurlbert, and she Can you hear me?
Yeah, is she the girl that did the fastest 240 in Moab or whatever it was? Someone
Something
else.
like that. Yeah. She
Dude,
beat all
crazy.
the men. She
Mm-hmm. By like
she's
9 hours, right?
yeah,
Like
no,
by
10
far.
hour 10 hours,
10
which
hours.
at
On
first
how
you're like,
long?
what? But then you're realizing it's a 70 plus hour race. I don't know exactly how long. I know these 200 mile races that are with elevation. I think people are doing it somewhere between like 2 days and 3 days.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, she doesn't have a plan, like a workout plan. She doesn't have a structure to her training. She just goes out and she says, "I drink my cup of coffee and then I decide what I'm going to do." And she has some probably that level of freedom is always, comes from having really good coaches and having really good training philosophy. And so the reason I bring this up is to that effect, she is sort of living out of her natural intelligence. All of
Right.
my first reaction is like, how does she know how much she's training her anaerobic threshold? How does she know
Right.
what her performance score? Like, I think about the data points of the Whoop and the data points of
Yeah.
like your heart rate. For me, it's so like affirming I'm training for a marathon right now, and I
Yeah.
coach and I have all the data, and I'm sort of geeking out over it.
Yeah.
And it's so affirming to see, like, oh, now I'm doing a run and my heart rate's way lower than it was when I did this when I started, and you can kind of see the tangibles. And she's saying, I don't want that. That's the last thing that I want. Because for her, she's having so much fun being intuitive and running by feel.
Dude.
And there's something magical going on because she's doing something that's even competitive across sex at this point. And so
Yeah.
I think for me, what's so fascinating is that the last year has been really proving to myself that I can sort of stick through a plan that I've predetermined for myself and
Yeah.
say, I can do this. And there's been something really magical about that, because amazing things can happen when you follow what science is going to say is going to work. But then I listened to her and her level of freedom, and I realized she's retaining like a love for the sport that can kind of get squashed out of you by a plan inevitably, because you're not necessarily running by intuition. You're not running by that immediacy. And yeah, it's like when we have there's no way I'd be as fit as I am right now if it wasn't for this plan and wasn't for having all the science behind it. But the next level that I'm kind of interested in exploring is, how can I learn how to do more things that are, important for daily life, like exercise and therapy, for one. You learn all these models, you follow these rules, you follow all these ways of being. And I guess the end goal is that you move from a practitioner, someone who experiments with the theory and experiments, with the principles, and you move to mastery, where you can fluidly kind of move in and out of what you need to do. And that's hard. I mean, we talk a lot about the 10,000 hour rule, you and I.
Yeah.
But I think this really applies.
Which you were right.
Therapy.
It was Malcolm Gladwell. We talked about that in our first session.
Really?
You said you were right. You were right. Malcolm Gladwell
man.
pioneered, made it popular. Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the whole mastery concept, I think it seems like you and I have a mutual like interest in mastery, because part of me just wants to not have to follow the structure anymore. Like my goal, and hopefully one day in therapy, I've sort of just imbibed so many of the different theories and perspectives that I can just go in there and follow intuition and pick up on patterns that are across modality. And more that happens the more I do this. I mean, I'm sure you feel the same way, where some days you pull from an IFS insight, some days you're thinking more of the relational model of Tiber. It's so fascinating, but it seems like you're tapping to this innate. You're tapping on how it seems like kids are more locked in perception than judgment, And
Yeah.
because of that, they're probably more grounded in their five senses and in their body, but they're also probably more grounded in
Yeah.
intuition, like picking up on patterns that are
Right.
happening behind the scenes.
I think they are, man. I think that's exactly it. I think that kids have, like, the intuitive sense is what gets squashed, right? And I think the classic example is kid being like, why? 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 Like that kid that keeps asking his dad why, and then dad gets, I mean, I would, I'm sure I will get frustrated and be like, just because. And it's like the message there is your intuition that there's something more that we don't all know about is wrong. Like, I think that's the message that's delivered to the kid. The kid's saying, like, there has to be a bigger why. Right? You asked, you texted me, I sent you this quote, right? That was a quote that I received from the Waking Up app. And it was something like, inspiration is always the thing that comes out of the unending I don't know. And I think, like, what that quote means, I don't know what it means, first of all. These quotes, I'm like,
that part of your mind doesn't know what it means. There's something inside you
right,
that knows what it means.
There's something, yeah, maybe. And there's this sense that I have that, like, I think when I hear that is that there's an aspect of my being that lives in this, like, I don't know, of an unknowing, of a silence. Like, I'm constantly being held in existence somehow. And then anything of inspiration that comes up from that. And so, like, the kid asking, like, but why, Dad? But why? Is an inspiration to explore more. That's coming from this kid's recognition of, like, I don't know. And I think the beauty of that question of why is that this kid is like, Jordan Peterson often talks about the symbol of there's a image of the, like, explorer, and it's a painting, and it's like, it's a drawing, and it's this guy that's like half of his feet are on is on the earth, and the other half is like in the stars. And it's like he talks about, like, this is and the one side is like pretty ordered and beautiful, and it's like a garden, and the other side is like chaotic, and he talks about the explorer is the one who has one foot in order and one foot in chaos. And, like, that, to me, that kid asking, like, why, is him trying to take a step, saying, like, okay, I have this foundation from which I can ask a question, but I'm realizing there's more stuff out there that I don't know. And I think that's intuition. I think that intuition is a really, really beautiful and profound thing, that we adults don't know how to handle because it's been squashed out of us. Because it's been squashed out of the people that squashed it out of us. Um, yeah, man. I'm really interested as well in you were talking about running, man. I'm really interested to hear more about your experiences of running, and I hate running. Even as I've seen you training and seen some of my other buddies training, I've been like, maybe I'll get into running just to, like, stay more connected with everybody. That's the way I am. And then I'm like, probably not. And we ran track together in high school.
Actually, no, we made a bet, right? And
oh yes,
there was something, I forget. There was like a $1,000 bet of some sort that if I didn't run senior year, I would have to pay you. But it was because,
it was
oh
because
wait,
of the
wait,
YouTube
wait.
videos, right?
No, I thought it was like you. So your little background. John Paul and I grew up on the same street, and John
Yeah.
Paul's family's house was just like
Oh, this.
you guys were the king and queen of like tasty treats. You always had
Yeah. Yeah.
the Tyson at, I don't know why I said king and queen. Your parents were the king and the queen
Right.
of snacks.
I was just
That
a young popper.
as a kid, my parents like the reputation of my family's pantry was like you open it and there's just ingredients. It's like jars of flax and flour.
Yes. Or like
Whereas
how many different types of crackers can be made out of various wheat like organizations, but like all of the grain, you know, and it's like this like cracker that's like pretty much like grains and like Elmer's glue that holds it together.
yeah, it's like you have to be a chemist to eat anything at my parents' house. Whereas for you, it was like the Tyson Anytizer wings and like the bagel bites. But there was something that you were eating that I think I was like, can I have a bite of it or something? And you used your leverage of having the best snacks, and you were, I think you said something like, I'll give you this if you run track, and if you don't, you owe me $1,000 or something like that. I was like, sure.
Yeah,
And
dude.
I just remember being so hungry. We were, in 8th grade or something out in your front. I know you used to shoot hoops out in the front of the street, and I was probably
Yeah.
skateboarding. Anyway, so we ran track together because I didn't want to lose $1,000. And anyway, you
dude,
were
is
saying,
that not the
you're
the inheritance for a bowl of porridge? Like right
what
with
is that?
the brothers in the Bible? Isn't there someone who gave away his inheritance to his brother for a bowl of red beans? Elisha or whatever.
Oh gosh, yeah. No,
He gave away
it's
his
ringing a bell.
birthright as
I
the
don't.
first son.
Gosh,
Man, I scammed the hell out of you.
he must have been really hungry.
You must have been really hungry. I was a
I guess
jerk.
so. I know. I must have been eating a lot of carbs at the time
Oh,
because when I
oh my gosh.
that's another thing. Right now, I'm eating James or John and I, my roommate who I'm training with, and a good friend of both John Paul and I. And we're both training for this marathon, which is on Sunday, so in 2 days.
Yeah, dude.
And so we're eating like 600 carbs a day. And
Yeah.
historically, like I've just found so much success for just well-being eating low carb. So it's
right. That's like the opposite of what you've been doing for the last years.
Yeah, I mean it's weird.
Yeah.
I feel like a bit of a buzz from all these carbs in my system.
Yeah.
But you were saying though,
yeah, dude,
I know
tell
in the
me
past,
about it. Tell about
just
the running, man. Yeah.
real quick, just because you were saying that you wanted to hear about the running, and you were now on Strava, which is like the social media site for running, and now you're thinking about maybe getting in. I know you in the past, you and I have both kind of seen running as like a punishment, and just because that was in the sports that we did. I wrestled in high school, and you played basketball. That's what you did when you were late. You ran a suicide, or you ran a lap.
Coach Bain made me run one when I was late to homeroom after school. And he was one of the assistant basketball coaches, but he was like, instead of detention, he was like, you won't go to detention. Meet me in the gym after school. I had to run a couple suicides in like under 30 seconds. So I was like, I was in my like school uniform, like slipping and sliding in my dress shoes all over the floor. Yeah.
Well, to that effect, I think I've always seen running similarly. It's always been like a means to conditioning or a means to getting fitter. The big buzzword that's going around right now is zone 2. Everybody's running in zone 2, which is a heart rate zone and a level of exertion which is so low that you can still have a conversation, or you can breathe through your nose. Or there's also like specific zones you can calculate. It can be a bit of a rabbit hole, but for me, learning how to run at a pace that I actually found enjoyable was like kind of a bit earth-shattering, And when we ran wrestling for me, I mean, it taught me a lot about mental endurance. But one thing that I think I was always kind of known for is Blake and I, another one of our friends, John Paul and I's friends. Whenever we would wrestle in high school, our coach was like, you guys always wrestle like it's the state finals, even in practice. Just like the on switch was always on. And so this has been a way to kind of practice sport and discipline and working out from a perspective of 80% of your running is easy and 20% of it is hard. And the mantra is make your easy days easier and your hard days harder. Yeah. So, but I guess like if I were to give you some point of what running has done for me is it's sort of like meditation time where it's a way where I can be in my body and move it. And there's something about like, I don't know if you feel this way when you go on a walk or something. But when my body is moving, my mind has a bit more clarity to just sort of offload and process and make sense of things that I've been thinking about. So I don't run with any music, or I don't run with any headphones. I run with, friends and talk sometimes, but often it's, you're running for hours on your own, and you just hear your own breath and hear your own footsteps. And there's something a little psycho about that. So it's a space for that. But what the other thing it's taught me is, so I've been training for this marathon for a year, and it's really shown me how like the smallest little things, if you're doing it over time, compound for better or for worse. So short example of that is in the shoe game, right? You go through shoes really fast if you're running. Last year, comparatively, this is not a very big number, but for me, it was huge. I ran 1,300 miles roughly last year, and you burn.
Dude, that's how much I put in a car. That's the average amount that you put in a car in a year. That's the average of distance that somebody drives a car in a year.
I think the average distance
1,300. Oh, that's 13,000.
I was gonna say, if you live in Steubenville, maybe it's the average.
I got my hundreds and thousands mixed up. Don't come to me for math. Okay, still really fucking far. Okay, let's just start there. Like really far.
It's about the distance from me to you right now, and some change.
Yeah,
I'm in South Louisiana, and John Paul's in Ohio. So I guess it's taught me that little things like the shoe game, there's like millimeters of difference in drop between the toe and the heel. And when you buy a shoe that's got a 2 to 4 millimeter difference, you feel it in totally different areas of your body, right? And so you have to strategically, reintroduce a shoe into your lineup. So like, for example, I just bought a new shoe after an old shoe wore out completely. It was a different drop, and my body was just trying to make sense of different tendons and different ligaments being used. So the right way to do it is before your old shoe is worn out, you reintroduce you introduce a new shoe once a week.
Yeah.
And then you introduce it twice a week, and you slowly let your body get in tune. So running has just been like a way to make my focus move to an awareness of long-term outcomes of the day, like rather than how am I going to feel today? It's if I buy this shoe that I'm going to run hundreds of miles in, how is that going to affect, my running form over the course of this year? Or that's been really helpful for me. And really enjoyable just to see how much you can do if you can stay excited about something that it does unfold.
How have you done that, man?
Long.
Yeah, how have you stayed excited about it? Or what's exciting about it for you?
Well, I think it's sort of like a mixture of goals and actually enjoying the immediate process. You have these you have your long-term goal, which for me has been to run this marathon. And it's sort of in the distance as this thing that's pulling you towards it as, wow, like that. I've never run that far. I've never run that distance. This is such a big, exciting milestone. But then you have these little goals. It's 26.2. So
yeah.
And the cool thing about this distance in particular is that it kind of requires you to learn a lot about subtle things in your body. Because it's a distance that is just past the body's capacity to store glycogen. It's just past the body's ability to store sugar. So you burn about 100 calories per mile, and your body can max store about 2,000 calories of glycogen. And so that's about 20 miles. And so it's right, like that's why people talk about the wall in the marathon. It's like it's the most horrific distance in some capacity because you are likely going to deplete your glycogen stores unless you strategically give yourself fuel along the race, which is such a science. So it's such
my gosh, dude.
It's such a mind-boggling distance to try to wrap your head around from like a nutrition perspective, which forces you to really learn what that feels like. And then also the other thing is like, how do you balance running for hours as a person who's got a full-time job, has relationships, other responsibilities, family, friends. How do you balance all of that? There's sort of like a constant game of Tetris that you're playing that you feel you gain like a stronger sense of mastery over, at least in my experience. Um, yeah, those are some things that really kept me excited about running. Is that you can really unlock parts of your brain that I didn't have access to previously. And it really, like, kind of for me has unlocked this whole psychology of perspective. Like now when I go on a 3 mile run, each mile sort of like really slowly appears to me. Whereas if I'm running a 20-mile long run, everything seems to just kind of fly by in rapid succession. And so it just really gives your mind a chance to kind of play with perspective too. Things that you didn't think you could do. It's like, there's no way I can run for 2.5 hours hard.
Yeah.
Suddenly you find that there's parts of your brain that know how to do that can kind of turn on.
Wow.
And it's also fitness too. It's so many different things that compound, but I find that really interesting.
Yeah. I'm really interested to hear about just kind of perception, like how that's changed for you. And I'm curious about like what is going through your head, like when you run. Do you find yourself like kind of shifting into like a meditative state? Or is it like, are you problem solving? Or is it like a lot of different things and depends on the day? Like it sounds like you just said like there's been a psychological shift, a kind of part of your mind that you've access to. And you were alluding to like the kind of physical experiences of that, but it sounds like there were psychological areas of your mind or mind states that you've accessed that you weren't as familiar with or didn't know were there like prior. Like bring me in a little bit more onto what your experience is while you're running mentally, and kind of what has emerged for you that you've been surprised by or enjoyed or
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really good question, and as you were talking, I think it kind of depends on the pace too. Like,
Yeah.
the easy pace is the pace where the mind just has room to kind of think about everything else. There's times where the mind can kind of just not even really be present, which is odd. You're running for hours, you're in your body, but for me at least, that's a time when my mind can really wander.
Mm-hmm.
Then the more intense the pace becomes, the more in my body I become in one sense, but also the more I find that my mind tries to sort of play tricks on the whole experience. And so it's sort of this dance I'm realizing between, can I apply effort and also can I stay relaxed? Because one of the main things that really helps you succeed in this long distance stuff is you're running hard if you're in a race pace. But if your muscles in your face and your shoulders start to tense up, it's just sort of the beginning of the end. And so you're constantly giving yourself this cue to relax. So this is like especially true with what's called the marathon pace or tempo pace, the pace you're sort of training to run your marathon at. It's sort of defined by being comfortably uncomfortable or uncomfortably comfortable, meaning it's just right on that edge of like you can apply effort, but you can sort of relax into it.
Yeah.
And I guess it's sort of like, I know you've mentioned before, what yoga has done for you is that it's given you a sort of experiential way to experience surrender in your body, because it's this mixture of tension and difficulty and relaxation and allowing. And there's something about that pace that can be that. So that's one kind of mental state you can get more familiar with. I think the more you run at that sort of like middle distant to long distant race pace, that can kind of give you a chance to really settle into discomfort with increasing amounts of awareness. Because the temptation is you just kind of shut off awareness and you kind of go into more of like for me at least, I can start to get really hard on myself. Push,
Yes.
and that can be good, but you just can't do that for 3 hours. You have to
And
save
you
your
can't do
mental reserve for the very end.
and you can't do it through life, man. That's
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I think I'm really interested to hear, because I think I'm finding that same thing, like you said, in different ways in yoga, and that's the thing in mindfulness as well, right? Andy's talks about effort, and he's like, too much effort and the mind becomes a constricted ball, tight, intense. Too little effort and we might drift off to sleep. The goal is to have just the right amount of effort, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about. That's what I've experienced. But I one of the biggest things that I'm learning in life right now is that this mentality of like, you just need to push through and work harder. I think this is the some of the toxicity that can emerge in motivational spaces of like, well, you just have to push through it. You just have to figure it out. And some people can do that, but not all people. And you are somebody who, I think I was curious in this as well, is like, when we were younger, like Mike, I don't know anybody who could embrace like pain and suffering and just like push through it like you could. Like, you were like the David Goggins of high school. You know, like, really, man, like, you just freaking ate it. Like, you just consumed it, digested it, shit it out, and kept moving. Like, really, your ability to like,
It makes me want to make one of those like cartoons that you'll see happens on the Theo Vaughn podcast, where it like takes his voice and it turns into a cartoon narrative.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
I just want all of this being put to image.
dude, let's find someone on Fiverr.
Yeah.
But really, man, you had such a tenacity, and I learned, like, I benefited so much, because I think, like, my dad kind of always like taught me the same thing. He's Polish, and he would just always say, like, you'll be fine as long as you can work harder than everybody else, right? And so that's what I like learned how to do. But hard work can get you really, really far, but it can only get you so far, and it's not sustainable. You will burn out at one point or another. And like, what you're talking about is like, when you have this big endeavor, whether it's over a time of like a year that you're training, or whether it's just a marathon, or even just on like the longer runs, you have to have this balance between, and this is what I think we don't know how to do. This is what I don't know how to do, and what I'm trying to train in the yoga practice and mindfulness, is you need enough effort. More than that, and it's problematic. Less than that, and it's problematic. You need enough effort. But if you know how to put your foot forward with enough effort, just enough effort, things happen. Like, things fall in place that you could have never believed. Like, if you can just put forth enough effort, and an expectationlessness. I think maybe this is what this woman is talking about.
Mm-hmm,
like what you've talked about, her finding, like, this woman has found this capacity to put enough effort in, but it's her passion and her enjoyment that's bringing her to that effort, that she's staying in that zone. Like, right, that is exactly what the zone of flow is. And I think when we find that, like, when we hover in on that, there's a certain capacity that it like self perpetuates. Like, we can get drawn off it pretty easily, but there's a certain kind of like fit, and that's what I think also draws us into this kind of experience where it's not quite out of body, but it's selfless, in insofar as we don't have to be aware of the cognitive emotional constellation that we think of as ourself. We are It's selfless in the way that it's self-imageless. We are not imaging ourselves. We're not imagining ourselves. We're simply there. Right? And yeah. Though I could keep, this is a thing that I get really excited about, because it I think this idea of enough effort, but not too much, but not too little, and how psychologically it extinguishes our awareness of ourself in a way that's actually totally engaging of our whole personhood. That idea is something that crosses so many domains. It crosses spirituality, it crosses physicality, it crosses relationships, it crosses work and professional, it crosses kids, like it crosses so many different domains that it's just like is something that I feel so interested and fascinated in.
I'm so with you. It's like it's that sweet spot of effort where you're not sluggish and you're not like tense. And I guess one of the real downsides of being, like you said, someone who I think I have an ability to maybe turn on a lot of intensity is that for me it's always about coming back into softness, always coming back into that gentle flow.
Don't let David Goggins hear you say that.
I know. Well, the thing is, I have such a reverence too for the people like him, because it seems like there's a certain set of conditions where if your life is so out of control or like so in the dark, sometimes you just need that level of intensity just to get yourself out. I mean, he was so obese and he was in such a terrible situation of poverty, or if you're, in a situation of trauma, or, I know for me, like I always have to reflect on this too, having older parents, and also my mom's from Europe, being older and from Europe, they're closer to World War II. Their psychology is so different. I think just because the trauma of the World War is so much more fresh in their body, and so I'm sort of like I'm starting to realize my own tendencies to sort of like push against the self and push against, like, I'm sort of leaning into the camp of let's achieve states where we can transcend the self, because there's a level of spaciousness to it that's so profound. And at the same time, I have a sort of reverence for the self as being such a functional tool that's so necessary in survival situations, right? Like I'm starting to realize that as a therapist, what's so important to conceptualize is the level of ego strength that's present in a person. Because if they don't have a strong sense of self, simply going into self-transcendence right off the bat can be really skipping an important step of development, which is, it's sort of like what we said on this podcast in the first one, where we say, yeah, we can be open to being wrong, but we can't even be wrong unless we first say what we actually think. It's sort of like there's a natural order to development. It's when the kid is saying no all the time. They're in their ego development stage where everything is no, and I never want to be told what to do. And it seems like that's another thing I've been chewing on, is human beings, we're constantly in this battle, or maybe not battle, but this spiral of development where we sort of pass through individuating, so separating from our parents and saying no, or pushing them away, and periods of bonding where we experience greater togetherness. And it seems like that pattern is sort of never ending. And one thing that I'm realizing, so to this point though, about, putting in a lot of effort versus being more gentle, my sister Maria is constantly like, Mikey, why are you doing this? Why are you pushing yourself to this extreme?
Yeah.
Because for her, she has that same engine, but she's kind of shared with me that a lot of that engine has come from a place within her that is a bit more constricted and can keep her from a sense of more gentleness and more flow. It's more like an intense parent, critical. There's an intensity to it, and it's made me reflect that a lot of these things that I do, like running marathons and doing ice plunges and extended fasts occasionally, I realize as we've been able to break it down together that it's something that I want to do. It's something that I'm drawn to do. But there are times where I feel like I have to do it and I feel compelled to do it. And as soon as that happens, I'm learning that I have to kind of pump the brakes on the whole project.
Yeah.
Like as soon as it starts to spiral into, you got to do this, it's just not worth the separation from my instincts to push
Yes.
myself. It's just not worth that cost. And that's been a really interesting lesson to learn, because as a therapist, I'm realizing so much of the initial phase of therapy is how can we add ego strength, which often means starting just with fundamental safety, a sense of safety. And so you've got in the cultural world, you've got this fear of David Goggins saying people just need to push and people are being soft. And then you've got the other sphere, which is it's all about gentleness and self-acceptance and self-healing.
Yeah.
And they seem to be saying different things, but I guess what I'm realizing is they're chewing on, at least, is that they're pointing to different phases of development, and they both need each other depending on where we are in our development. But also, we have parts of us that are in different stages of development. So I have a part of me that really just needs more of the gentle self-acceptance.
Yeah.
And then I have a part of me that if I were to just say, we're not going to do hard things, it would be deprived of its sense of play, its sense of discovery. And I think this is such an important conversation to have, where people feel like there's a one truth to this, or a one perspective that's right or wrong. And I think it maybe a more balanced perspective is to see that we need different things at different stages of development.
Yes. Yeah, man.
How does that land for you?
Great. It takes me to so many different places. The last thing that you said, it's just something that I'm, becoming way more aware of, is you said, we need to realize that we need different things at different times. And that's one of the hardest things for me, to live in that reality. It's so easy for me to be pompous and arrogant and narcissistic, because that's the way I defend myself from shame. That's the way I defend myself from not knowing, or is to be like, well, this is, and this is one of the reasons this is why one part of me, right, loves to get so involved in the kind of sage, esoteric spirituality, right? Is like this part of me that's like, well, I really know what the answer is, or like, yeah, but this is what like the real answer is, and so you said, when you said like, the important thing is to realize that not one of these is like the truth, right? And you sent me that quote the other day of our tendency to try to grab onto dogma, to say like, this is the truth, so that we just have something to attach to, rather than actually living in that truth or actually integrating with that truth. We use that truth as an egotistical safety shield, and then we plow through other people with it, or try to convince other people to do the same. I do that more than anything. And like I was reminded of this, especially in a conversation I was having recently, and we were talking about the same thing, of this like tension and this need to like push through things. And I was kind of feeling like, oh, like I was kind of wrestling with it, and one part of me was like, dude, I just can't do that anymore, because I burnt out on it. Like I just burnt out on last year. My life has been like, you know what? I'm not my life, but large portions of my life have been like, in order to make up for my lack of belief in myself, or my feelings of depression, or my feelings of not valuing myself, I'm going to work harder than everybody else. Because I was taking that part of my dad that's like saying, hey, as long as you work harder than everybody else, you'll be okay. Like you'll get taken care of in life. Like you'll be able to provide. So I was taking that, and I was like, as long as I work harder than everybody else, I'll be okay. But I was saying, like, if I work harder than everybody else, well, then if my effort is more than everybody else, my production's going to be more than everybody else. I'm going to be better than everybody else. Everybody else is going to see that. And then they're going to be like, oh, wow, and I'm going to feel so great and have this great self-esteem, which never happens, right? Not the self-esteem, but like that. Yeah. And so I was like, there's this part of me that was kind of saying, as I was talking to someone who's talking about like growing in tenacity, growing and kind of pushing through. And I realized in that moment, like after that conversation, how undeveloped like my sense of, because kind of what I was saying is like, oh well, it needs to be a balance. You know, we need to be able to push hard, but also to be able to step back. And there's this idea of the dialectic, and the ultimate dialectic, to my understanding, is the ability to hold at the same time both the desire for change and also the desire for acceptance. It's the serenity prayer, right? God, grant me the grace to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the serenity to know the difference. But all I was doing, like in that moment, was like grabbing onto the dialectic, right, and being like, "Oh well, I really have it figured out." And it's like, "No, that you're like pushing too hard." And then he said something to me, and he just said, kind of like, "Well, I'm looking at it as like as an experiment of like, what is the, like, if I get in this cold shower, like, or if I go on this run, or if I do this workout that so much of me is saying like I don't want to do, if I push myself past that point, like what's going to happen?" And he was kind of asking, had listened recently to a Huberman podcast, and Huberman was talking about how it's just the quote, right? If you believe that you can, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. And he was saying how my friend was saying how there's two different camps in psychology. One camp that says that like effort and resilience is a limited resource, and the other camp that says that like effort and resilience is an unlimited resource. And what he was kind of saying is, I'm testing out the possibility that maybe the effort that I can put forward is an unlimited resource. And so I'm trying to push through these things and seeing like if it works. And I just like step back. I was like, dude, I need more of that. And it just immediately brought me off my high horse after I was sitting and thinking about that. Like, man, like I think there's such a beauty in that attitude of just like exploration of like, I'm going to see what happens, and it's because we were both talking about that attitude as well,
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're especially right that like we need these different things at different times. And like, this is one of the ways that I learned to protect myself in that time of like depression and difficulty for me. I learned that like the way I protect myself now is envisioning a future in which I'm not filled with shame and pain. The way I protect myself now is envisioning a future where that shame and pain is eliminated. But that like mentality got me through, and it was really helpful. But the consequence is now that I have to learn how to step back from that mentality and recognize when it's showing up, because ultimately, it keeps me disconnected from people. So I think the greatest challenge for me, both as a person, as a psychotherapist, is to recognize that sense that we need different things at different times. And I'm the most efficient psychotherapist. I'm the most helpful psychotherapist when I can recognize, okay, what does this person need in this time? And I can help that person to see that, and I can deliver that, and I can help that person to connect with what that is, whether it's in session or outside of session. And I'm the best psychotherapist also when I'm recognizing like, okay, JP, like, what is this time for you? Like, what are you needing? What are the things that you're trying to like compulsively grab onto to protect yourself? And like, what would it mean to recognize your needs and have them met by saying, hey, like, I want to connect right now and I'm scared,
Mm-hmm.
rather than trying to like prove how good I am so I can win someone's admiration and then feel connection. It's like, that's what I think the growth edge is for me, is learning to like express the desire for connection rather than act in such a way compulsively so that I can earn, affection or admiration.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, this is such a fascinating spiral, just from the perspective of spirituality, because it seems like a lot of the spiritual camps also have to do just with differing momentary needs at that time.
Oh,
You know, I can think about like there's been moments
that's
where
brilliant, man.
the all is grace theology has been extremely helpful for me coming out of seasons, just like you're talking about. Like, I guess I didn't have the same perspective as you did about me having like the capacity to just grit and grind. But coming out of that season, there was just so much fatigue in my system, and I think also
Yeah.
so much. Sometimes what happens when we're on the tail end of a season of intensity, I feel uh, there's like the urge to push in the conscious mind, but the body is still saying like, if we've just reached our end, it's time to just back
Yeah.
off. And so they're at war with each other, like the body's intuitive sense saying, I need rest. I not just rest tonight, not just rest tomorrow. I need a year to just feel
Yeah,
more.
man.
I need a year where I may be less on, a year where I put less pressure on myself socially. And I can remember for myself, coming out of a season of more like accomplishment and doing and striving, the most healing thing in the world for me was experiencing God as a loving parent who says,
Yeah.
just come rest with me. And there was such a catharsis in that experience. And there was also an experience of feeling the unconditional nature of God in that experience.
Yeah.
And I remember though, like it was pretty recent that was no longer where I needed to be for the next season. And how that manifested was I felt myself getting spiritually sort of like flabby in a way, where I sort of was like, the feeling was presuming the unconditional acceptance. Not that it's not ever there, but what my soul really needed was the experience of feeling what's possible when I reach the end of myself again. And so there was a season then as well where I was seeking like rest unconditionally, but it was a sort of form of addiction to a practice, I think, like a subtle addiction to the feeling state of feeling that unconditional acceptance. And so it had lost its actual like beauty. It had become
covetousness, like that spiritual materialism we talked about.
Yeah, exactly. It was empty of the feeling. To put it in religious terms, the Holy Spirit no longer felt present in the halls of that space. It felt like it was just me and relaxation, whereas before it felt like, an experience of oneness, an experience of union. And now it's felt a little bit more like where your discomfort is. The harder you lean into it, the more growth there is. And I'm sure that's going to reach its natural end too. Like this is probably going to be a somewhat of a dance. And I guess what's coming to mind for me is what seems so cool about this is that the more like you've talked a lot about this over the years of virtue being the mean between two vices.
Oh, thanks for saying it.
Yes.
There was a part of me that's like, I gotta say it. Yeah, dude. Yeah.
That's been something that you've harped on for years, and it feels like there's so many ways in which that can happen. But for me, one of the big dances has been oscillating between total acceptance and holding myself to a high standard. Sometimes the high standard can get so out of control that it just feels like what we need is just to be allowed to be what we are. And then there's times where the allowing can get so intense that it feels like I don't have there's no life in me. I don't feel like I'm letting myself be challenged. It's almost like dogmatically resting. And it seems like the ultimate goal is, can you be able to live in both spaces more fluidly? Like, can you move in and out of them? And something that you know this, but to people who are listening, I've been reading a lot more. Carl Jung, who is, I can only take in doses, but the more I read in doses, the more I feel like I become edified.
And you've been
by him.
taking some pretty heavy doses, man.
Some heavy doses. But he has one concept that he says the parts of the personality cannot integrate until they have first differentiated. Right. And so we go through seasons where we have to first really differentiate and develop a part of ourselves before it can then meet another part of ourselves that's more well developed. And this has been such an interesting way to conceptualize clients. And also just it makes it so much more interesting to walk with people in their journey. Because rather than it being, hey, you need to find this unconditional love that I felt, it's maybe a moment of asking, does it seem like it's very important for this person to be developing this part of their personality?
Yeah.
What could happen if they really leaned in? What if I helped them on the journey to really lean into development? And so, like, for example, there's these, it seems like cultural camps spiritually in the church, Catholic Church, where some people are more about willpower and it's on you, like they maybe have more of an empowerment perspective. At least that's how it's conceptualized. And then other people who see it much more as everything's a gift, everything's grace. But the problem is that the people on the willpower empowerment camp see the all is grace people sometimes as victims, right? It's like, no, you are in control. And then the people in the victim, or not in the victim, but more in the surrender space, who maybe are perceived as victims, are looking at the David Goggins of the world and saying, you need to chill out. You're not on the path. And they're just colors. They're different colors of the personality trying to find wholeness, it seems. And that's been a really helpful way to see people more and more.
Yeah, man, that's an awesome perspective. I think this is, oh man, it moves me. Like, this is why we need dialogue so much. Like, this is why I need dialogue so much, and why I want to be fearless to step in, to talk and to explore ideas and to have these ideas shifted and changed. Because the shifting doesn't happen unless we're open to dialogue. And, I remember Coach Copeland, one of our high school teachers, God rest his soul, and our track coach, he said to me once, I think he said to us, you should never enter into a conversation unless you're willing to have your opinion changed.
Mm-hmm.
And that just like rocked me, and that's something that I think recently, because of kind of some of the difficulties that challenges in life and transitions and what felt to certain parts of me like failures, high hopes of things happening and them not playing out that way. I think I grabbed onto this, like, to protect myself from shame. Like, no, I'm right. Like in a lot of different areas, this like security of like, but I'm the right one. And I just realized recently that I think I really had lost that sense of like, hey, I want to enter into every conversation with every person with this belief that like my mind could be changed and that I could learn something here. But that only happens with dialogue, and one of the things other things that is really jumping out at me right now is Bowenian therapy. So Murray Bowen was a therapist that developed, really advanced hugely and introduced, was a real pioneer in the realm of family psychotherapy. You saw the family as a system, and worked with the system. But what he developed is this idea of the differentiation of self. And so what he said, this self-differentiation that you're talking about, he said that's the goal of the family, is to create children that are well differentiated. And so what he said is that every human being experiences the pull to both individuality on one hand and togetherness on the other. And what happens is the goal of the family is that the child can leave the family and hold both of those at the same time, not valuing one over the other, nor having to posture one of them against the other. This is the ability to say that I am a part of my family and I'm totally my own person. I'm a total member of my family and I'm totally my own person. Right? This is the middle ground between two opposite vices, too much and too little. Is the differentiation of self. And he says that the way that we become differentiated is by learning to become non-emotionally reactive. That when we are emotionally reactive, our actions and our thoughts and our beliefs and our feelings are actually driven by the emotions and the reactions of other people, right? So someone says you're stupid, and then I say you're stupid, right? That's that emotional reactivity, and I'm actually fused with that person, and I'm fused with them in one of two ways. Either I'm fused with them in the togetherness, and so someone says you're stupid, and I say you're right, I'm stupid, right? So there's enmeshment. Or I'm fused with them in revolt. So they say you're stupid, and I say you're stupid, right? So I'm emotionally reactive in the sense of either I'm pulling away or I'm pushing forward. And this is like the magnet trick, right? This is the way I explain reactivity in terms of mindfulness, is that in a magnet, right, if you put north and south together, they suck together immediately. In a magnet, if you put north and north together, they repel, right? So both of them are emotional reactivity. This compulsive growing closer or this compulsive moving away. And neither of them allow freedom for the human spirit. And what's interesting too is John Paul II, and actually I learned this in your dad's book, The Persons of JP2. He calls this the polarity of the person. This irony that we are both fully our own individual selves as dignified human beings. We are fully ourselves, and that God gives us to ourselves. And at the same time, that we are only most fully ourselves when we are in relationship to other people and when we are giving ourselves away to other people. This polarity, right? That we're both individuals and we both have this like need for togetherness. And so the goal of the family is to develop children by creating a space where they learn not to be emotionally reactive, but learn to be receptive. That is, to enter into dialogue, to both have a self, but also to be willing to allow that self to be molded or shifted through kind of rational thought and prudent reflection. The goal of the family is to create a child who can both be a part of the community and also not be run by the community, who can be their own autonomous person, but also who isn't stranded in autonomy such that they have an inability to connect with other people or go along with what other people say. So I think that the interesting thing of this too is, right, well, I think I already said this, it completely parallels the idea of virtue as a middle ground between two opposing vices, too much or too little, in terms of having a self. And so this idea of individuality, of the mindfulness of non-reactivity and receptiveness, of like the role of the family in terms of developing children who grasp the individuality and the togetherness. It's something that I've thought about for a really, really, really long time, and I think it's what we lose that when we shift into tribalism, whether it's a spiritual tribalism, whether it's a dogmatic tribalism, or whether it's a political tribalism. And the reality is that the more the tribalism exists, the more it perpetuates reactivity, which just further exacerbates and leads to a higher polarization. And the key is that we don't want to be polarized. We just want to realize, like, hey, these are both goods. We need to learn like how to hold those goods at the same time, and in which instance we need to value one over the other. But we can only do that if we have the space to kind of sit with that.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said. That's really beautifully said. There's a
Thanks.
the thing that sticks out to me is the ideal goal of the family is to create this individual, individual citizen. They're a citizen of the family, and they're an individual. And what it seems like it does is it creates the healthiest groups if you have groups of people that are all fused to one another at the level of mere togetherness, to the point where nobody can speak their mind when they're upset, the group integrity begins to fracture and actually begins to lose the very thing that makes the group so special, which is free togetherness. And it's, a group is made up of individuals, and so it's not the collective oneness only that makes a group or a family healthy, but it's healthy individuals being together. But there's something so dangerous to the stability of a group to have free individuals be a part of it, because they don't need the group. And so that, I think, that is maybe what's so I guess sucks the life and the spirit out of a group that doesn't have the reverence for the human person and the human individual to express itself exactly as it is. There's a phrase in a realm of a very niche world called integral theory, which is developed by a guy named Ken Wilber, who is I used to think of people who would come up with grand theories of the universe as sort of insane, but I think he might have done it. He sort of like integrated East and West in very, very profound ways. His main book is called Sex Ecology and Spirituality. And he has this principle that he's sort of extrapolated from. He's brought together all different forms of developmental models, from Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the chakra system to spiritual transcendence in the West to the Christian mystical tradition to the Zen tradition. He's just integrated so much. And inside of this, he has this principle that I think is so helpful, which is to grow, we must transcend and include. Right, so it's good to begin to transcend our tribal tendencies, which overemphasizes togetherness at the expense of the individual. But the ultimate goal would be to include it in our own personality, respect that we all have a need for togetherness. So I know we're close on time, but I want to give you a chance to just kind of say any final thoughts that are coming to mind.
That's what, like, I think originally our name, right, and still our handle is onward and inward, like transcend and deepen. I think we should read that book. That's what I think. And then there was one other quote that I heard the other day that I think captures what we were really talking about with effort, with flow, with kind of earning love, especially with acceptance and change, right? That balance. And it was I think a Zen master who said it, and it's you're perfect the way that you are, and you could use a little improvement. And I love the lightheartedness of that and the sincerity. Yeah, you're perfect the way you are, and you could use a little improvement.
Yeah, our mutual friend Adam Trufant, whenever he communicates that concept, he says, "We are here to help you grow and develop and to push yourself and to challenge yourself and to transform. But you are unconditionally loved wherever you are on that journey." There's some.
Oh man.
But what seems to me, like, just for fear of, like, it's so easy to just stay descriptive of this, but I do think there is something prescriptive. Like, that's our role as a therapist, is to prescribe how do we do this, how do we heal. And I think it is essential to begin with safety. It's essential to begin with the sense that you are okay as you are. There's something about that does seem fundamentally prior. As maybe it's like a way of thinking about it is we have to begin as children before we can really be adults. We have to be totally loved unconditionally before we can leave the garden without it being totally fracturing. And I think that's what trauma is where you're forced to be an adult without knowing how to integrate any kind of safety of the garden, without any kind of safety of being a child. And that's a really beautiful role that we're in, that we get to help people come home to that. Yeah, this is a good episode.
Back to
I'm excited to build off of this. Yeah, back to childhood. Cool. Do you have to run now?
Well, thank you for joining. Yeah, I got to run.
Okay.
Thanks, man. Thanks for today. Thanks for the
Episode
time.
3.
It's always
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, all our listeners. And we'll be coming back to you again from the Dirty Tap Water. Onward and inward.
Onward and inward. Episode 3.
Episode 3. Peace.
Alrighty. Peace.
Love you, man.
Love you too.